had a big catastrophe and I broke glass all over my kitchen floor, so I had to rearrange. But that's what happens in the kitchen, right? Sometimes we just have crazy things happening. It's been happening to me too much recently. So I hope that you are well. I sent out our recipes last night. We'll be making some brownie batter hummus and some bircher muesli. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off of video. And if you could not find the recipes, just send me an email and let me know. And I'll make sure we get those to you. But these should be some very good recipes for, let's see. Make sure you can see me. These should be some good recipes for some cool weather. Not cool weather. For when it's hot outside and you don't want to heat up your kitchen. But some good ways for us to get some of that fiber in that we talked about this week. And these are some of my favorite recipes, especially the brownie batter hummus. Whenever I go somewhere and I bring a dish and I bring this, I always get requests for the recipe. So it's one of the things that we use beans, and beans are some of those unexpected ingredients to have in a dessert food. So we're going to start off with that one, and I'm trying to, I think my head's shining in my lights of the kitchen. So we'll see if we can get this rearranged a little bit. Okay. We're going to be using black beans. The recipe says navy beans, but you can use either one. I did not have navy beans on hand, but they're both very mild tasting beans. And I don't have a sink next to me in my demo kitchen, so I'll just show you this. But I typically drain in a strainer and rinse my beans. You may know this already, but if you rinse your beans, you may not have as much of the carbohydrate in there that causes a little bit more gas. If you tend to find that canned beans really cause you a problem with some gas, then you may do better if you actually soak beans yourself at home and cook them. And you can soak overnight in water. I usually do 2 cups of beans and then fill the pot to the top, soak it in water overnight, and then pour off that water and rinse it. And then I cook my beans in a slow cooker or in the Instant Pot until they're soft. And I need to include my basic dried beans recipe for you if you don't do that already. I like to use beans a lot. They're a cheap source of fiber. They're a good source of protein. And to my knowledge, they're not limited at Kroger right now how many beans you can buy. Like they limited my meat this past week when I bought some meat. So good source of protein, good source of fiber, and they're so versatile. So I like using a can of beans and a can of meat in a recipe, or a pound of meat in a recipe. I think we'd already talked about that when we talked about our cauliflower taco meat, but just a reminder that beans are a great way to kind of stretch out your protein a little bit. Black beans have a little bit less fiber than a navy bean, so if you're really trying to increase your fiber, white navy beans have 2 grams more fiber per serving. But now we've gotten them all drained out. I'm going to use 1 can of beans for this recipe. But if you really like this a lot, or if you're going somewhere and you want to make a bigger dish, the recipe does double very easily. So the beans are a good source of that prebiotic that we mentioned. Good source of soluble fiber, good for helping the stool add some water to that and to make it softer. So we'll start with the beans. I also use a nut butter in this recipe, and I'm going to be using almond butter today because that's what I have, but you can also use tahini. Tahini is a sesame seed paste. And again, I think sesames are one of those seeds that do feed some good bacteria selectively. Also a good source of calcium. So if you haven't ever used tahini before, I use it in some of my other hummus as well. That's not a sweet hummus, it's a savory hummus. And I need to send that to you because I think it might be another thing that you would enjoy as a sandwich spread or as a dip for some vegetables. So my almond butter that I have has a lot of oil at the top. It does not have any palm oil in it. This is just almonds and salt, and I buy my almond butter at Sam's. A lot of nut butters out there have palm oil shortening. I like to stay away from that if I can. I don't think a lot of it it's not going to necessarily be a little bit going to be a problem, but it is a saturated fat that doesn't have as much benefit as a coconut oil does. So I don't use a lot of palm oil I think they've replaced a lot of the trans fats with a palm oil because it is solid at room temperature for the most part. So this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of almond butter. So if we double it, it ends up making a nice 1/4 a cup. I'm not doing so great measuring this right here. You can also use peanut butter if you'd like, if you have that on hand. Taste is really good with any of those. So we have our almond butter, and we're going to use for our sweetener some maple syrup. You can use honey in this if you'd like as well. I like to use maple a lot. We'll use honey in our other recipe today, but it tastes really nice with either one of these. So I'm using a 1/4 a cup of maple syrup, and then we're going to use a 1/3 a cup of cacao powder. And I have cocoa powder written down, which is, you may use that as well if you have that on hand. But cacao is one of those, it's cocoa beans that have not been heated. So we have a lot of those compounds that haven't been affected by heat in here, but contains some flavanols that I mentioned the other day that act as a prebiotic, a food for your good bacteria. It's not a fiber in itself, the flavanols, but it is a type of prebiotic. The cacao powder itself has a lot of potassium in it, a good bit of magnesium. It has a little bit of protein in a tablespoon. There's 2 grams of protein, which isn't bad, and also 2 grams of fiber. So it's a really nice compound to use. I'm using a 1/3 a cup. I put it in my oatmeal. Sometimes I just mash up a banana with a little bit of cacao powder. Use a fork to mash up a banana. And I like that for a nice sweet treat. Sometimes I just sprinkle it with some chia seeds. And if I'm wanting something kind of sweet, then that's a good idea to kind of tame that sweet tooth and still get some nutrients in. And bananas themselves are also prebiotics. So that might be an idea for you. There we go with our cacao. And then I'm going to use 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And I make my own vanilla just because that's something I enjoy doing. So I usually have it in a quart glass jar. Lots of vanilla beans. We're just about toward the bottom here. So one time I made this recipe and my children were helping me. I think I was tripling the recipe. My children were calling out ingredients and we were doing multiplication. And somehow I got to the point where I think about 3 or 4 tablespoons of vanilla. So when I served it in my ladies' gathering, it had a little bit more of a boozy taste than I would have ever expected, because this is made with some rum and vodka, and which I really never partake of that. But the ladies thought it was quite nice. So if you ever need something a little bit more fun, you can always up the vanilla content. But this is 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then that's all we're going to put in here. But if when you make this, you realize, it seems a little bit thick, you can always add in a little bit of water, or sometimes I use coconut milk or almond milk to thin it out a little bit. So it depends on what you're doing with this dip. If it needs to be thin, you can. So I'm realizing my plug doesn't reach, so I'm going to step over here and put the plug in. So I'm going to pulse this for just a minute. You just want to get it really smooth. I'll show you what this looks like. It looks pretty smooth to me, but if you want to go a little bit smoother, you can. It doesn't look the nicest, but it does look like brownie batter. And who doesn't like to just lick the brownie batter out of the bowl if it doesn't have eggs in it, which it usually does. So this is a great treat if you have grandkids coming over, nieces and nephews, going to a gathering, or just need something fun for yourself. This is a really fun dip. And you know what I like to dip in here are apple slices. You cut up an apple, good source of prebiotic, keep your skin on there, and you can dip that in there, or spread it on a banana. So instead of peanut butter, you could spread some of the brownie batter hummus on a banana. And that's a nice treat. Also, it's nice with like some rice cakes or little popcorn cakes. Sometimes I eat it by the spoonful. Again, you can mix this in some oatmeal. And it lasts for about 4 days in the refrigerator, I would say. At the most, I would leave it. So if you don't think you'll eat it all, which I've never had a trouble with my family eating all of it, you can freeze it. So you can put some of this in some ice cube trays. So you can just pop out a tablespoon or two at a time if you'd like. I've put this on toast before, so maybe some Ezekiel bread or whole grain toast. Spread some of this hummus, put some banana slices on top, just a little bit of something different. Or if you have extra, you can also put this into a smoothie. So you could use some non-dairy milk if you want to, and maybe a banana or an apple is nice in a smoothie as well, and put some of this hummus in there and blend it up. So that's a nice treat as well. Additionally, if you're making a smoothie and you haven't made the hummus, you can put some beans in that smoothie. And that kind of sounds funny, but that's a really great way to get some extra fiber. You really can't tell it. I would start with about 2 tablespoons of bean in a smoothie and see if you like it. And then you can always increase to like 1/4 cup, makes it more creamy. And again, you really can't taste it. There's a bean, like a bean flavor in there. I probably wouldn't use pinto beans. Those are a little strong, but like a black bean or a navy bean is a great idea. And another thing with these black beans is that black color, if you've ever rinsed the beans, soaked beans in water and rinsed them, kind of has a purple hue to it. So I'd say these black beans kind of count for our purple color. Let's let them count for that. So we get a little bit more of that color on our plate. So brownie butter hummus, wish you could come over here and taste a bite. It's delicious, very versatile. So next thing that we have that we're going to make is our overnight bircher muesli. And I'm not sure if you've ever made or had muesli before. I spent the summer in Spain when I was, right before my senior year of college. And Europe tends to serve muesli a lot more than we do. And as I've traveled to other places like Belarus and Siberia area to do some English as a second language teaching, we had muesli a lot at the hotels where we stayed. So muesli is basically an uncooked oatmeal sometimes people soak it overnight and sometimes they just serve it with some milk and you eat it that day or put it on oatmeal. So one thing that I like about this is that you can make it overnight, let it soak a little bit. Some of the nuts and seeds get a little bit softer so they're not as crunchy if that's a problem for you. This type of muesli was invented by a doctor in the early 1900s who really wanted his patients to benefit from fruits and vegetables. And for a long time, fruits and vegetables were considered, in Europe particularly, the food of poor people. And rich people ate meat. Well, guess who stayed stronger and healthier? The people who are eating lots of fruits and vegetables. And so he kind of developed this sanatorium for his patients to come and enjoy healthy food and exercise and being out in the sun. And novel concept back then. To us, it seems like, well, it's a given that you exercise and eat healthy, you're going to feel better. But a long time ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. So first ingredient for this would be our oats. And I'm going to show you, I order 50 pounds of oats at a time. We're about halfway through with this one, but I have a co-op that I'm a part of, and because we eat so many oats, I order that in bulk. If you're interested in learning more about Azure Standard, let me know. I think I mentioned it at some previous sessions, but this way I don't have to go to the store every couple of days and buy a bag of oats because we go through them a lot. These are gluten-free oats that I order. You don't have to use gluten-free for this. And this is just a traditional rolled oat, probably more like an old-fashioned oat. And I'm going to use 1 cup of oats in this recipe. I scaled it back for you in case you didn't want to make a lot, but this is very easy to make a big batch of this if you like it, and then just eat for a few days if you'd enjoy. Or you can put the dry ingredients together of this and make it as you go along, kind of serve it out. So we'll use 1 cup of gluten-free rolled oats here. And then we'll also, it calls for some shredded coconut. And I did not pull this over, so I'm going to pretend that I'm adding in shredded coconut, and I'm going to add it in later because I like the taste of coconut. If you soak it overnight, then it has, it's not as crunchy. It doesn't have as much of the texture issue. I have some people in my family who don't like the texture of coconut, but I'm going to be the one eating this, I'll tell you. So, and then also we can use some sliced almonds. I'm going to use some slivered almonds here. We know that some nuts have a prebiotic capacity as well. So you can use walnuts if you'd like to. My walnuts were in another freezer, so I didn't grab those. But I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of sliced almonds. And then it calls for a tablespoon of ground flaxseed, but I'm going to use some chia seeds instead because we're playing around with some different things, and we talked about having chia this week. So either the flax or the chia would work. I'm going to use a tablespoon in here. The chia does absorb water. The flax would as well, so it adds a little bit of body. When you first add the liquid to this, it's going to seem a little bit more watery, but then the liquid kind of absorbs overnight, and that's a nice effect of this. And then I realized I did not pull all my ingredients for this together. So you can add any type of dried fruits that you want. My children just happen to eat the rest of the raisins that I was going to show. So we don't have any raisins, but I'm going to put a few other fibrous compounds in here. So first of all, we're going to use a carrot. And I'm going to grate a carrot. Now the recipe doesn't call for a carrot. This is something I'm adding in. But carrots are a good source of prebiotic, particularly the skin on this carrot. So I just wash the carrot very well, take off the ends, and then grate it. If you want to use a food processor for the grating to chop that up, makes it a little bit easier. You can put it with a traditional food processor blade, or if you have a shredder on your food processor, you can shred that up. Might be a good idea to save your fingers, or if it's more of a challenge to grate. I'm going to grate it today though, just for ease of use. We're also going to grate our apple in there. Apples are one of those things that it's true that I think an apple a day can keep the doctor away, but there's so many compounds in this apple. One of which is the pectin, particularly concentrated in the skin. So that pectin helps thicken this recipe as well. But pectin is used in jellies and jams to help thicken up things. It's that soluble fiber that dissolves in water that we've talked about, and it can be really helpful for digestion, for helping bowel movements be a little bit easier. So I like using that. If you have a pear, you could use a pear as well. Apples are great sources of things like quercetin, which is another compound that's really nice. If you have trouble with sinus in the springtime, quercetin can be very good for that. Good anti-inflammatory. So lots of compounds in this apple. My favorite apple is Pink Lady. So this has a little bit of a tart taste to it. I enjoy that. It's not quite as tart as a Granny Smith's. It was a little bit of a sweetness, but just something I've discovered recently that I really enjoy. And they have finally come out with an organic Pink Lady that's available in many different places. So I bought this at Kroger. I've seen Pink Lady organic at Walmart and Target, I think, Aldi. So you do want to make sure you wash this, even if it's organic, because it's still going to have some residue on it. And I realize I don't have my grater either. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. This is the grater that I use. It's a Microplane brand. I think we use some of another one like this somewhat for our zest, our citrus zest, but this has a little bit bigger holes on it, and it's flat. But you put this down, I'm going to use this as a plate. You put it down here on like you're on a solid surface, and then you just scrape the fruit or vegetable along here, and it's very sharp, but because it's a very good tool, it does an effective job at grating just little shreds. So if I'm just going to grate one carrot, typically I'm not going to get out a big machine for that. Again, but it can be helpful if you need to. So I'm going to pretend like I'm grating this carrot, but I have not washed this yet and haven't cut out the end of it. So I will do this in a little bit when I really prepare this food for my family. But that's going to get mixed in here as well. And then the same thing with the apple. We'll shred this skin and all and kind of just go around the apple till you don't have much besides the core left. And just grate it right over the bowl or onto a plate if you need a more solid surface. So you're getting those good fresh enzymes of the apple in there as well. One thing it calls for in the recipe is some cinnamon. You can add cinnamon if you like. I don't particularly care for the taste of cinnamon in my muesli, so I kind of to leave that one out, but I think I might add in some ginger because I like ginger with apple and carrot. So that's a different flavor. You can play around with flavors if you like. You might even like some fresh ginger. So you could, if you like fresh grated ginger, grate a little bit of that in there as well. That would be a really nice flavor in here. The other thing that it calls for using is some coconut yogurt. And I know we've talked a little bit about dairy or non-dairy. If you're using dairy yogurt, that's fine. But if you haven't ever explored a little bit with some non-dairy yogurt, this So Delicious brand here, I know it's probably backwards on your screen, but So Delicious is a nice brand of coconut yogurt that I've used. And this is plain. It doesn't have any, well, this has have a tiny bit of sweetener. I bought this for my boys. They also have an unsweetened variety that you can buy, and either one is fine. I've used the unsweetened to make some kind of salad dressing dips, things like that as well. I think coconut yogurt is probably my favorite non-dairy yogurt. Almond milk yogurt can be a little bit strong. I don't care for that, and I don't care for cashew milk yogurt. I do know that you can make your own non-dairy yogurt. Particularly coconut milk yogurt is pretty easy to make with coconut milk that's from a can that's thick, plus a capsule of a probiotic. I have a recipe for that, but I have not explored it yet, and so that's something I did not want to bring up necessarily us doing today, but it is an option. So use this or some Greek yogurt if you want to, or an unflavored yogurt that you would have in your refrigerator. And then also it calls for some hemp seeds, and hemp is another good source of fiber, good source of protein. I have that. If you don't have it on hand, you can use more chia if you want to. You can use a little bit more nuts. So you can just play with this recipe and kind of make it how you want it to be instead of having to just follow the recipe. It's very forgiving. You can make it according to what you enjoy and what you have on hand. And then you're going to also put in some liquid of some almond milk in there. So half a cup of that, pour that in. And it will stir that all together. If you don't have almond milk, or if you don't want to use any milk, you can also use water. It's going to be fine, especially if you have the yogurt in there. So you can make that a little bit more versatile. And then one other thing that you could do if you enjoy the taste of lemon. The first time I ever had this kind of muesli, I followed a recipe that used lemon. And so I just cut a lemon in half and squeezed that. I'd also taken the zest off of that and mixed it in here. So that's another great way to incorporate those bioflavonoids from the lemon or the citrus that we've talked about before. You could use some orange if you wanted to. Just adds another different type of flavor. I'd also say that you could substitute like some orange juice, freshly squeezed, for the almond milk. That might be another idea to make it a little bit more of a dairy-free option. So lots of ways to customize this. You could make this in a big bowl, or you could go ahead and divide it out into like little mason jars or little bowls that you've prepackaged for yourself. If that's helpful to kind of go ahead and have breakfast ready to go, that's a nice idea to do. So what I have with this dry mix here, and you can add the spices in, you could just save this dry mix and then maybe put it in a Ziploc bag or in a big jar. And then when you're ready to make the muesli, you can add in the liquid ingredients like the carrot and the apple and that type of thing. And so you've done a little bit of preparation ahead of time if that's something that you find out that you really enjoy. So I did want to show you one small thing before we wrap up. I mentioned some of the fiber that I use sometimes, and this is the paleo fiber that I mentioned. It has lots of different prebiotic fibers in here. It has some acacia gum, which is a good prebiotic, some guar gum, which is another prebiotic, cranberry seed and carrot fiber, inulin, which is one of the things that comes from chicory root. It's very good for feeding certain classes of bacteria. Citrus, glucomannan, which is another type of fiber, apple pectin. Again, they put our whole food form in here. A little bit of psyllium husk. It's not the first thing on the recipe. Some flax and prune. So usually recommended dose for this is 2 teaspoons a day. But I have my clients start out with a lot less than that and just work their way up if we're trying to work on their fiber intake. So I might start with a half a teaspoon. And what we could do is put that fiber in along with this oatmeal recipe and just sprinkle that in there. You can either put it in the big batch or just put it in your serving individually. So that might be another way to incorporate a little bit extra fiber. If that's something that you feel like you're needing and would benefit you, that's a good way to do that. Some of the other fibers I had mentioned on Monday would work in here as well, the microbiome fiber. You could always add a little bit of extra flax seeds and nuts if you wanted to as well. You may just have to increase the liquid content of this recipe a little bit so it's not too thick for you. So if you decided you wanted to double the flax seed, I would add another maybe 2 tablespoons of liquid in there just to balance that out, maybe 2 to 3 tablespoons to balance that one out. So you can kind of play around with this a little bit. You could also add some extra fiber into your hummus. So you could use some of this paleo fiber if you wanted to. I'm not sure about adding, I've never added flaxseed to the hummus. You could do that. Again, you would just need to add a little bit extra liquid, maybe add a fourth a cup of liquid if you did a tablespoon or 2 of flax. So you can play with that, but those are just some natural ways to increase your fiber on a daily basis. But I think that wraps us up for today. I have a little bit left to finish on my oats, and I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for tomorrow's breakfast. So it'll be nice to have it on hand. Oh, and I didn't mention, if you do want to protein power up this recipe, you could add a little bit of the collagen powder that we've talked about, any of the natural protein powders. That would be another way to increase the fiber. But if you're having to watch your protein intake at breakfast because of your medication, this would be a very nutrient-packed breakfast without having too much protein in there. So you could enjoy a side of a boiled egg along with some of this as well. So if you have questions about these recipes or what we talked about on Monday, just send me an email. I look forward to seeing you around the table on Friday to talk a little bit more about fiber. And I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon.